Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Watch No Evil. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And today we're going to be talking about the 1954 classic Alfred Hitchcock film Rear Window, starring Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly. To introduce this movie, first of all, we get given this very nice, very intimate, sort of picturesque New York scene. In one of the artistic boroughs, we get to see these apartment complexes that all share this courtyard area. The main part of our action takes place here. One of the things that I found particularly striking about this movie was the cinematography, specifically in the way that they wanted to really enhance the voyeuristic experience, not only by having the main character be this voyeur who's watching his neighbors, which of course, who doesn't spy on what their neighbors are doing occasionally, but the way that each of the individual neighbors' scenes are framed have some sort of connection with who they are as people, specifically shown, in my opinion, through the windows. One of the things that I was thinking about was when we look at the image into Thorwald's apartment, and Thorwald is the one who kills his wife, there are two windows. We see one window into the bedroom where the wife is, and we see one window into the living room. And in many of their scenes together, they are bisected by this window image, and so it's supposed to represent the separation between the two as characters. And then when you look at the young ballet dancer across the street, her door is open, the window is significantly larger, and there's both a window into the bathroom area, into the kitchen area, and a door that immediately falls onto the fire escape. I took that to represent sort of how open she is, and sort of how exhibitionist she is, considering that she's a dancer. And so she's used to sort of being on a stage, and of all of the people in the apartment complex, we get to see the most of her apartment. Mm-hmm. It's sort of creating these window metaphors to represent the individual characters as much as it is trying to enhance the voyeuristic experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Did that grab you at all?
For as much as we throw the word voyeurism around, this is the most voyeuristic of any movie we've seen, because that's really the whole point of the plot of the movie, but also how the plot plays out and how it was filmed. I like what you said about the Thorwalds, how they're kind of like separated by that space between the two windows, but also I think that functions nicely for the plot of the film because it gives you a blind spot and gives you that space to wonder what's going on in that apartment. There's not that openness like in the dancer's apartment. I mean, even later on in the film, when Lisa goes into there, she actually like hides in that blind spot. You can't see where she is, and you're kind of wondering, is she in a closet somewhere? Or like, where is she? The Thorwald's apartment is also the one that has the lights off the most, any apartment in the complex. So it gives you that, it's almost like anti-voyeurism there, because it's the one that you can't see, and it makes you wonder. That's the one he's paying attention to. That's the one where he really wants to know what's going on in there. And not only because of that, but because of the strange behavior of the Thorwalds.
Absolutely. One of the things that I thought was a really cool addition that I didn't really catch until sort of thinking about it afterwards, in the way that I said that those two windows represent Thorwald and his wife, it also sort of clues us into the fact that Thorwald killed his wife, because the first time that we see him after the murder, he is in that main living room area, and it is the first time that the blinds are closed over the right window, but not over the left. And so by closing the blinds, it's sort of symbolic of her death. And so then we see him come back in, and he lies on the couch in the living room. So we get to see both of the windows open. One is on him, one is on her. And then after the murder, they close the one on the right. And so then we see the rest of his main scenes play out in the left side. That is until later on at the end of the film, when it becomes important for us to be able to visualize what's actually happening in that room. One of the ways that we can see that being impactful is because he takes his wife's purse into the living room. And then when Lisa goes into the house at the end of the movie, she finds the purse obviously in the bedroom. And so it's almost like that piece of her is being dragged up again with the express intention of catching him in his deeds. And so she's being used, and so it's giving sort of life to that space. The one that sort of doesn't necessarily work super well with my window theory is the pianist, the songwriter. The explanation that I had sort of come up for it was that his is the highest room that we see. We always peer up at it rather than peer down into it like we do for the ballet dancer or directly across, which puts Jeff and Thorwald on the same plane. And I think that that's sort of referential to how this movie sort of idolizes that songwriter. They really put him on a pillar because he is the pride of the neighborhood. He's sharing his music from the studio apartment. And how many times did Lisa or Stella comment on how beautiful the music he was creating is? And so I think that there's sort of a way that his life is very exposed, but it's because it's performative and it's supposed to sort of represent him being the joy of the neighborhood.
With that, I mean, he has one of the larger windows as well.
Yeah, it sort of wraps all the way around that room for him.
Mm-hmm. They do show him a few times, and they show him coming in drunk and kind of like upset a couple times and just being, kind of mopey in general. But then they show him partying. He packs his studio apartment with all his friends, and you do have that large open window. So I think all those things together kind of portrays this image of the artist as, all right, they appear to be an extrovert, party-loving kind of person, but on the flip side, it's not always how it appears to be. So just because his window is huge and you can see everything that's going on doesn't mean that you can see everything that's going on inside his mind.
And especially since they sort of treat that with the relationship that he forms with Mrs. Lonely Hearts at the end.
Right. That's important to note because the two sad people throughout the movie, after Thorwald has been apprehended, they get together and they seem like they're happy together. And then leading to my main takeaway from this movie is I think that this movie is somewhat anti-marriage. Between Jeff and Lisa, they're at the point in their lives where they're supposed to be engaged, and Jeff says, I don't want to marry her because her lifestyle does not match my career. So that's one thing that kind of like sets the stage for, maybe marriage isn't for everyone kind of thing. The fact that the Thorwalds are some of the very few married characters in here, and the husband murders the wife, that's not a very happy ending. And then there's the newlyweds that they show at the beginning, but at the end, when they show everyone else being like really happy, then the wife, she's yelling at her new husband. She's saying, if I knew you'd lost your job, I wouldn't have married you. And everyone else in the complex is all, happy at that point. And it's like this neat little like ribbon on the story. But then there's that. I don't know for what reason, but it seems very anti-marriage.
I don't know if it was necessarily anti-marriage in my opinion. I think it was very anti-men.
Well,
because I mean, every woman in the movie is respectable and reputable. There's a lot of portrayals of the different types of women. So you have Lisa, who is obviously the socialite, but she really gets to demonstrate her versatility and her willingness to go out and be adventurous. And you have Stella, who's the more maternal of the female characters, and she is level-headed, she's reasonable.
She's a prophet.
And she is a prophet. She's always insightful. The ballet dancer, she's sort of free-spirited, but it never really shows her in a way that is demeaning of her character. Especially, it talks about her survivability and her sort of desire to be a working dancer. It solidifies her role as a good person by the way that she interacts with what I'm assuming is her nerdy short husband that comes home, and it's supposed to be like, oh, she was just waiting for him. That's her true love. She's not vapid. She's not looking for the hottest guy. And then you have the relationship between the Lonely Hearts couple, where she's sort of the character that we feel for emotionally the most throughout the movie, because her side of the story is really sad, and so you can only hope the best for her. And I would say there's something also just really fun and spirited about the woman that's the sculptor. And then you have the men. So you have the detective who doesn't believe anything that any of them say. So the incompetent detective. You have Jeff, who is just this sort of layabout, and he's very childish in the way that he's reacting to Lisa and the talk of marriage. It's sort of the immortal bachelor complex where he won't ever settle down, and it's a part of his inability to commit. You have Thorwald, who's an actual murderer. There are very few male characters specifically in the movie that are at all likable or reasonable or level-headed.
So I somewhat agree. I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's anti-men.
I think that it was really trying to show that men were the cause of the problems. Even with the husband who was out of a job. Why did he lie to his wife about not having a job? So he's a liar on top of it. I think it portrays men very poorly, and it portrays women really well.
I think it's more pro-women than, I guess, feminist.
Anti-man.
Yeah, I guess more feminist than anti-man. Because, yes, Thorwald's murderer, you have to have a murderer in the the movie about murder. In the fact, like, the thought in 1954 of having a female murderer, I think, was beyond their thought process. But that would be actually a pretty good twist in a remake. Have a female murderer.
Lisa's the murderer.
Right. She goes in there and murders Thorwald. But anyways, yeah, so he's the murderer, obviously beyond redemption. But then Jeff kind of starts out being a bit of a dick because, Lisa's throwing herself at him. She gets 21 for dinner and, gets the chef to bring the food over for him, and
Lobster Thermidor breaking up his regular meals of sandwiches and goddamn milk.
she's literally whining and dining him, and he's just like, oh, whatever. I don't really like you that much.
I just don't know if I can get married.
Yeah, and it's...
I want to be a photographer.
Right, and as the plot of the story progresses, they do bond over the murder, and he realizes that, okay, she's cooler than I thought she was, and, we could get along, and they do have that kind of happy ending at the very end when he's got both his legs broken. But with Doyle, the detective, he is a bit of an ass as well. I think that this movie needed a skeptic after Lisa was convinced by Jeff that there truly was a murder going on, and there need to be this element of we could catch him, but there's something in the way. And I think that Doyle, he resembles both the hope that the conflict might resolve peacefully, but he also is the one standing in the way with his skepticism. Right.
So you're saying that he's the foil, essentially, for the film.
At first, he comes through in the end.
Yeah, he does come through in the end. I mean, it's interesting how quick Lisa is to believe Jeff, too. And I would say in, like, a normal circumstance, it would be more reasonable for Lisa to be the skeptic, but they do really turn it around in this movie and have the police be the skeptic. It's not necessarily a new endeavor to also just incorporate the character of the incompetent policeman. It's sort of like the Keystone Cops complex, where they're never going to do the right thing, and instead it has to be the everyman vigilante sort of spy that comes and goes and is the one that's truly detecting the crimes. And in this case, it all comes down to Jimmy Stewart being this engaging reporter who's stumbled upon a case and the police won't solve him, so it has to be solved by him, and he's the one that's going to do it. I just think that it really shows Alfred Hitchcock's thought process about that, because in the same way, he sort of treated the private detective in Psycho poorly. It showed him as ultimately incompetent. It's just sort of a trademark to have that character in particular.
Both Arbogast from Psycho and then also Doyle in this film, they're both like law figures, but also they're the hope that conflict can be resolved peacefully. Because as a thriller movie, it wouldn't be very thrilling if it was just resolved as we would expect it to be in reality and how we would hope it would be resolved in reality. So it's to suspend pardon the pun, suspend the thrillingness of the plot is to either make these characters incompetent or, in the case of Psycho, kill them off.
In the nature of these movies, to incorporate characters that are going to be the obstacle to overcome. And ultimately, it is supposed to be representative of the fact that anybody can solve a crime and anybody can do the right thing. We've suspended the time of the superhero, and now we want to see real people actually making a difference. Mm-hmm. And we get to sort of see that with Jimmy Stewart. At the same time, I think it also is sort of reflective of a social value in it, in that this community that they've created in this little apartment complex is supposed to almost be this like self-sustaining commune. I started thinking specifically about the monologue that the woman gives about her dog from the balcony. Mm-hmm. And she's like, oh, he loved everyone, and why would anyone have done this? Well, and so there's this, big, long, melodramatic speech, but I started thinking, it was just like, this is a really tight-knit group of people, and they all come out, they say hello to each other, they make sure that they're talking to one another, and they're participating in this microcosm of a community, and all of a sudden we get to see the like status quo of that community shatter, and we get to see it shatter twice. First with the murder of the dog, and then with the capture of Thorwald. So it happens for us, the audience, and then it happens for the community itself as well. Mm-hmm. And then there's a change that sort of occurs. Everything becomes a little bit more protected. Every one of the characters that are outside, suddenly their habits change and they interact and regard each other differently. And it's not until the end of the movie that it's supposed to sort of be back to status quo by having the relationship with the Mrs. Lonely Heart and the songwriter and the young ballet dancer, and we get to see that the sculptor is asleep on a chair on the lawn, tanning, just like she was at the beginning of the movie. Mm-hmm. So that there's a sort of return to form, the reemergence of social value. One of the things that I was reading about this movie is part of the voyeuristic element in this is that with Jeff being specifically a photographer that is used to action, like he said he was going to go to Afghanistan, or he was going to go to Germany, or he was going to be in the middle of a racetrack, all of these things. He's used to sort of high adrenaline occurrences. He starts this sort of watching, and he sees what's going on with Thorwald, and a part of it is he's hoping that something bad happens, mm-hmm. so that he can sort of be alive again. I think that there's sort of an anxiety to him, given that he's been in this cast in his house for 7 weeks.
Yeah, and there is that quote from Lisa at one point. We're plunged into despair because we've discovered a man didn't murder his wife. I feel like Lisa kind of has these moments where she says things like that, and we think about the human aspects of what is going on in this movie. We all kind of want our neighbors to be murderers because that would be exciting and that would give us something to talk about. I think those are the kinds of things in life that make you feel more alive.
Yeah, of course.
She kind of like points to those moments. Even when the detective, he like says something quippy and then leaves the room, and she goes, I love funny exit lines. And she's the most self-aware character, but it's also to that point that I mentioned that we kind of all want our lives to be this dramatic thriller at some point because we want to have that life experience that it offers.
We want to have our hero moment.
Right. Going back to what you mentioned about the community as a whole and everyone interacting with each other, given the high interaction of everyone, I do find it interesting that the two people who are most shut in are Jeff and Thorwald. Mm-hmm. Jeff, to no fault of his own, besides jumping in front of a race car.
Oh, yeah, absolutely a fault of his own.
Well...
What are you talking about?
Unforeseen consequences. But also, I think that in the end, when Thorwald kind of pushes him out of his window, it's almost like he's pushing him back into the community. He's pushing him into that courtyard where they all interact with each other. And then Thorwald is the only one on the inside.
It's sort of breaking the habit. There's sort of an element of wishfulness to Jeff's pursuit of this, because I think that it would be, in any other circumstance, very easily dismissible for a person to sort of see something half-heartedly across the way and take to it. But the nature of his circumstances sort of put him in this position. I also think that it's sort of representative of his inability to commit to Stella.
To Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa, rather. One of the things that keeps him from Lisa is the nature of his work versus the nature of hers. So obviously we said she's the sort of socialite and he is the action photographer that goes out on these assignments. And he has to now confront the prospect of their engagement without sort of the safety rail of, I gotta go on assignment. I'll be gone to Egypt for 4 months. I'll see you when I get back. So he doesn't have that safety net anymore. He can't just leave the country on assignment. He has to now have something that he can partake in dangerously that would absorb his attention and absolve him from the responsibility of having the conversation around their engagement. He doesn't have to take responsibility for his commitment issues. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, like you said, it seems anti-marriage. I think it's as much anti-commitment.
Yeah, I think that may have been the message in there. Mm-hmm. That it's
also Jeff's a child.
Yeah, that much is true. He lives for the adventure, and in the beginning of the movie, he does seem like very immature, especially with how he reacts to Lisa.
Yeah, he wants to be a bachelor.
Well, yeah, and then when she kind of like threatens to leave, well, I'll be leaving then, and she says goodbye, and then he goes, well, don't you mean good night? And she says, no, I mean what I said, and he's, well, when will I see you again? And so he doesn't want to marry her, but he doesn't want her to leave, which is a very childish way of, and a very selfish way.
Incredibly manipulative.
Right, it's very selfish and manipulative, which children can be like that sometimes.
Yeah, you would know. You have 2 of them.
What?
Charlie and Smudge.
Oh, yes, my 2 cat children. They can be selfish and manipulative. That's very true. That's the perfect way of describing a cat. I do want to talk about how great the filming of the actual murder was, because, I mean, we don't actually get to see the murder from our perspective, so we are left wondering with Jeff the whole time if he's making up some crazy story or if it actually, if these pieces actually fit together in the way that he would expect. And that leads me to the second thing I want to talk about is it does end up being exactly what you'd expect. And usually in a thriller or mystery type movie or story, usually there's some kind of twist that...
Yeah, there's no twist.
There's no twist, but...
And that in itself is a twist.
So there's that, but also that this movie is so enjoyable still. And you'd expect it to be like, well, it played out exactly as I thought, so I guess I kind of wasted my time with it. But it doesn't feel that way at all.
I think because it rides the line so much about the indeterminacy of whether or not he killed his wife or not. And one of the sort of main pieces of evidence that it keeps giving you throughout the movie, it keeps planting... pun, in your mind is the garden. Mm-hmm. It keeps saying like, oh, we think that he buried part of his wife under the garden. And it shows the dog going there. It shows the man looking down at the dog. The dog was digging in the garden, so the guy killed him. And it keeps giving you all of this evidence to say she's in the garden, she's in the garden. And then Lisa and Stella go over there with a shovel and they dig it up and there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden it all sort of unravels. And we're like, oh, maybe he didn't kill his wife because this is what all of the evidence has been pointing to. And now all of our evidence is gone. It does a good job of giving you these breadcrumb trails that lead nowhere and instead are red herrings to an end. It's funny because it even reasserts at the end of the movie, oh, she had been buried in the garden, but the dog got too close to it. So he dug her up and put her head in the hat box upstairs.
No, that's the saws they're talking about.
Whatever. I might have misheard.
Yes, someone, I think it's Lisa, was like, wow, like, do you think she's buried in there? And Stella goes, well, you haven't been to many cemeteries, have you? Because the flower bed wouldn't be wide enough to hold the body. But we all kind of had that thought.
Well, and we know that he cut up the body parts because of the multiple trips to the East River.
And he's like cleaning out the briefcase the next day and cleaning
Mm-hmm.
off the saws and
Yeah. I mean, damn, it is a gruesome story. And it doesn't show you any of that gruesomeness. There's no on-screen gore or horror, but something about the fact that at the end we get told, yeah, he chopped up his wife's body and then dumped it in the river is terrifying because he absolutely almost got away with it.
Speaking of the flower beds, this kind of reminds me of what I was talking about earlier, how we all kind of hope that something like this happens to us in life.
Mm-hmm.
I had a bit of a flashback. When I was a kid, we had a house where our back window of our house, our back patio window, faced this, like, it was a little bit of a field. And on the other side of that field was the back of someone else's house. So it's very, very similar kind of setup as we get in this movie. And I remember seeing, like, their back garden dug up, and they had these black trash bags that they were probably just using to clear out plant material or whatever. But we always joked that they're burying bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But it's exactly what I was talking about. We joke about it, but we also kind of like, wouldn't that be exciting if that's what was going on there? That's why we read horror novels. That's why we read mystery novels. That's why we're like into true crime.
Mm-hmm. You know anybody that's been murdered?
Do I know anyone that's been murdered? Yes, I do.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, those people were
that
not
was
murderers.
a divergence.
Sorry, it does click into what I was saying though.
Yeah. It's because I was thinking the person I know was somebody that I went to high school with.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sort of crazy mystery surrounding it, and it's like it really sort of grounds it too. And I think a movie like this is so much more potent because incidences like this actually happen, and you get to sort of see the fact that there is sometimes a non-reaction. Mm-hmm. From certain people, and it's one of those things where we get into our little social habits and social circles and the way that we move about our day and the people that we interact with can all of a sudden change, and it's because something like this happened. We talk so much about the potential for realism being an incredibly powerful tool in horror cinema, like when we talked about The Strangers, or how in Psycho the idea that someone could be a murderer underneath this sort of engaging facade is terrifying. But this movie, more than Psycho, really plays to that very possible nature. Whereas Psycho, it's like, okay, this is clearly fiction, and it's in this fictional, deserted place. Rear Window, it just takes place in a New York borough. It takes place in this apartment complex. Everybody here knows each other, and they've seen each other, and they interact with each other, and the social norms are never changed, and then it breaks. And if you start to examine your own social habits, you wonder, could this be something that I experience? Or if I did experience it, would I be able to react in any way comparable?
I think that ability to relate increases the voyeurism outwardly, so that it's almost like Alfred Hitchcock is watching you.
Oh, yeah.
It gives you an even deeper connection to the characters in the movie.
And I do think that Alfred Hitchcock is watching me.
Still, from the grave.
Just constantly.
I love that he was in the movie.
That's one of my favorite parts, too, is that short cameo where we get to see Alfred Hitchcock just sort of being a goofy Alfred Hitchcock. I believe this is an artist's commune, or like an artist borough, because they have a photographer, they have a dancer, a sculptor, a composer, and a singer that I don't think ever really get to see.
She lives above him.
I think that in that, especially for this time period, there was something that everyone could relate to, because the 1950s, this is how people engaged their hobbies. They were either dancers as kids and then continued to be amateur dancers, and that dancer that we see is supposed to be an amateur dancer. We see the sculptor just sort of like working on a sculpture outside, and it's just sort of a hobby. And then you get to see the composer and the singer. There's something that everybody can sort of latch onto, and it's very different than how people latch onto Jeff, Stella, and Thorwald. And it tries almost to make Stella in particular, I think, seem very out of the ordinary by giving her such high status. and by making her this like socialite. Like we talked about the fact that they had 21, the fanciest restaurant in this movie.
You mean Lisa?
I mean Lisa. Yes, yeah. Lisa is the significant one. She's the socialite. They make her seem really sort of unapproachable at first. They gradually make her easily the most likable character in the movie. But the idea that like, oh, she dines at the fanciest restaurant and she wears these French dresses and she knows these Italian designers, and it makes her part of the bourgeoisie and therefore not related to this small New York apartment complex. It's trying to present the characters in the complex as people that we could latch onto or that we could identify with, and then, they bring in the outsiders as these extra lives. There's an interesting idea about voyeurism with the two of them, because Stella and Lisa, and there's sort of an interplay between them and their reactions with Jeff as well. You sort of get to see how the other half lives. There's a voyeurism in that as well. Lisa gets to see how Jeff lives in this, what I'm going to call middle class. And then Jeff sort of gets to see Stella, who is in this servitude position, essentially. And so there are 3 layers of class status interacting with each other and seeing how the other one lives. And I think that's especially potent at the end when Lisa is reading the books on the bed and she goes from her fairy tale book and she puts it down and she picks up the fashion magazine, and it's supposed to be sort of representative of living and working cohabitatively in both worlds.
Stella even says, we become a race of peeping Toms. And I know that when I am driving around and if I happen to be driving past a neighborhood with really big houses and their windows are open and at night where you can see in, I know we've all done it. You want to look in there and see how are they living, what's going on there, while we're on the subject of class. Towards the end, when Thorwald does approach Jeff, he says, do you want money? I don't have any money. And I wonder if that has anything to do with maybe to give us some idea of motive, because his wife was an invalid. Maybe he couldn't afford to take care of her anymore.
He's also going to sell her jewelry.
Well, I think he was a jewelry salesman is why he had all that.
Right.
And I think he was going to sell...
Never mind.
I think you're right. I think what his plan was, he's going to sell her jewelry among the jewelry stock he already had. So it was this covert kind of deal.
Yeah, because he was trying to get rid of the wedding ring, because that was the thing that indicted him in the end.
That's the big piece of evidence, besides him trying to commit a second murder in front of a bunch of people.
Right, yeah, the whole strangly-do. I also thought it was incredibly funny that they have the whole gun exchange scene, and then it just shows the police pulling him away without the gun being fired. It's like a last expectation jab from Alfred Hitchcock. He's just like, ooh, they're going to shoot the bad guy, and they didn't, and you just got blocked. Your entire mood changed, and you're just like, well, okay, whatever.
I think it's also a suspenseful element, because you're like, oh, what if he hits Jeff instead?
And they needed Thorwald to stay alive, because Thorwald confesses. 2 seconds. It's just, he did it. It was all, he buried the stuff in the garden, and there's the thing in the hat box, and he chopped her up and put her into the East River, and he's going to take us out there, and it's just slow down. He didn't wait for a lawyer.
The fact that he confesses so quickly is supposed to give us the impression that he has a guilty conscience and that he's just ready to explode with his guilt.
The way that he interacts with Jeff over the phone, basically confessing to Jeff about it too, I would say supports your assertion.
And you kind of joke that you could kind of feel for the guy, but at the same time, the whole thing with his wife being an invalid and kind of messing with him in the beginning, we're supposed to sympathize him on a minimal level, because there's that weight on him.
It tries to make you feel for him, I think is what you were going for, especially in the beginning.
Yeah, a little bit.
Because I think even Jeff feels for him. He sees the wife yelling at him.
Yeah, just like how we get glimpses of every little story going on in this film, we only get glimpses of what his motive was for murdering his wife. But speaking of this final part of the film where Thorwald and Jeff actually interact, when Lisa is caught in Thorwald's apartment and the cops come and Thorwald looks at Lisa's hand, sees that his wife's ring is on her finger, and then you see him look straight at Jeff. And the way that it's...
Directly into the camera.
Right, it's the way it's filmed. He's looking directly into the camera. It's almost as if
you.
he's looking at the viewer, us. And that's a whole nother voyeuristic thing. It's very, very obvious there. Also, at that moment, you go from, all right, Jeff's comfy up in his apartment. He's just watching. He's not in any real danger where he's at. But then at that moment, you go, well, Jeff's stuck in his apartment. And if this guy can figure out exactly what apartment from the inside, he's in some real trouble. And then the phone rings. So you go from, all right, Jeff is safe up in his castle to Jeff is screwed. Jeff is so dead. And it's this intense suspense all of a sudden. Up until that point in the movie, there's the mystery aspects, but no real suspense until then.
God, this movie is shot so well.
I'll be honest, this is the first movie that I was captivated the entire time. And I like a lot of the movies that we've watched already. And for a lot of them, it was the first time I was seeing them. But this is the first one where I was like, I didn't even want to take notes because I didn't want to miss anything.
Because everything seems important.
Right. And everything kind of is important. Like, there are a bunch of little stories going on here. There's the main one that we see from Jeff's perspective. But then you do get all these stories through imagery of him looking into these people's lives.
Every single character has a fully developed arc. You could have set the viewer in any single apartment the way that we get set in Jeff's apartment, and it would have been an equally thrilling movie, or at least an equally interesting movie. And also, the cinematography is gorgeous. The way that they frame those windows and they make them essentially be pictures. Obviously a reference to the fact that Jeff is a photographer, but they make all of these windows look like little picture frames that you would hang up on the wall. That's interesting enough, but then he also has scenes like where Jeff is looking into Thorwald's apartment and it's dark inside and all you can see is the red glow of Thorwald's cigar sort of come in and out, and it's just that little bit of light. You know that he is sitting there in the dark also watching back, looking for people looking at him, and that's intimidating. That is intimidating as hell.
Yeah, that was a really interesting shot. And also when Jeff is dangling from the window, they have all these sped up shots of people kind of like rushing to come see what's going on. I wonder if it's supposed to increase the intensity and the pace of the movie at that point, get your heart racing a little bit more in that moment.
It's supposed to be the whole community coming together. That's why we get to see literally everyone. It reestablishes the entire ensemble, that sort of recapturing of the community anxiety, and it changes where the audience sits, because before we were sitting with Jeff in his apartment, and now we get to sit with the audience watching the climax of the film. We get to become the community.
You really are stuck in Jeff's apartment with him until that moment. Another interesting thing is how they show the thermometer 3 times throughout the movie.
Yeah.
The beginning, the middle, and the end. It's almost like they intentionally divide this movie into thirds. The first being the setup, start of the suspicion. The second being the actual quote-unquote investigation. And the third being the resolution. Throughout the movie, the temperature goes down. I don't know if that's supposed to be like the literal like the heat lowering. I don't know. Not only like the temperature heat, but the heat of the intensity of the plot.
That's what I think it is. I think that it is literally representative of that.
Or maybe it's a statement on how there's a correlation between high temperatures and crime rates.
It gives you an opportunity to see Jeff like sweating and nervous.
Yeah,
which is fun.
There's an excuse to get Jimmy Stewart shirtless.
Exactly, but he doesn't have a pool to jump into and miss like Bart Simpson.
Oh man,
what did you think of the Simpsons iteration?
Oh yeah, we probably say we finished watching this last night, and then Matt goes, "Oh yeah, the Simpsons spoofed this in one of their episodes." I'm like, I haven't seen that episode, so I immediately went and watched it, and it's great. Half about the Simpsons getting a pool, and half about Bart becoming Jimmy Stewart. And also having Jimmy Stewart in it, that was a really funny moment where he's looking through his telescope at all his neighbors, and then he like zooms in on this other guy it's Jimmy Stewart with his broken leg and his binoculars looking back at Bart, and he goes, that kid looks menacing.
I love that parody. That was season 6, episode 1 for anybody who wants to go watch it. My other favorite thing about that is they do exactly the same like setup where they think that Flanders buried Maud in the garden. The thing that I liked about that movie too is they also took some shots from Psycho and they put it in, because in this version we actually get to go into the Flanders house with Lisa, because he sends Lisa. Oh my god, he sends Lisa in both movies.
Damn it.
I didn't even realize.
Okay, so I will now reveal what the game is.
Okay.
So the game is, I'm going to say a quote or something from the movie, and you have to tell whether it was The Simpsons or Rear Window.
God damn it. Okay. That's going to be a good one. Because Lisa, she's in both, but they cop some shots from Psycho to show Lisa like going up the stairs to like search for evidence.
Right, and she takes like forever to go up the stairs.
It is one of my absolute favorite Simpsons parodies.
I mean, I'm ready to go on to the game if you...
Yeah, let's do it. I'm ready.
So,
hit me.
This is Who Said It? Simpsons Bart of Darkness or Rear Window. So I'm going to say a quote from either Simpsons Bart of Darkness episode or Rear Window, and I want you to identify which I have pulled the quote.
Okay.
Here's the first one. He's becoming isolated and weird.
That's Lisa. She's in both. God damn it. That's The Simpsons.
You're right. That is The Simpsons they're talking about.
Yeah. Use of the word weird. I don't think it would have been used during the 50s.
Yeah, probably strange rather than weird. Here's the next one. If only she was ordinary.
Jeff says that to Stella about Lisa in Rear Window.
You're right. Good job. Next one. There was an optics festival and I wasn't informed.
That's got to be The Simpsons.
Yeah.
but wait, okay. Let me try and guess which character it was. There's an optics festival and I wasn't informed. Okay, so the fact that it is so incredibly smart of a line, it makes me want to say that it was like Homer.
It was actually Bart.
It was Bart?
Yeah, it's when she...
Why?
When she gives him the telescope, she's... I got this from the optics festival this last week, and he goes, there was an optics festival and I wasn't informed. And I think that it almost was like supposed to be this old-timey way of speaking that's like supposed to be reminiscent of Rear Window. All right, here's the next one. It's a bit of a thinker. This can't be what it looks like. There has to be some other explanation.
Oh, that's got to be Rear Window.
It's actually The Simpsons.
No, it's not.
It is. It's actually Bart who says it when he's looking at Flanders.
I was so close to a perfect score.
I'm just happy that I fooled you with one. So we're about halfway done. Kept to himself, no neighbors got close to him or his wife.
Oh, that's got to be about Thorwald.
Yep, that's Rear Window. All right, and then make sure you don't get caught. That's all.
He says that to... Oh, God, that's got to be The Simpsons.
No, that's actually Rear Window as well.
Damn it, he says it to Lisa.
Yeah, Jeff says that to Lisa when they're leaving with the shovel.
It's so mundane that it's like...
I had to make this difficult.
I know. That's the thing. It's just like, is he tricking me? Do I remember every level of dialogue from this movie?
That's okay. Here's a gimme. Somebody took my juice money.
Well, we know that one's The Simpsons because Jeff drinks milk.
And also is never shown with money.
And also... No, he's got money because remember he pulls out money to pay Lisa's bail.
Yeah, that was Ralph in the pool. Like Nelson comes up from the bottom and he's like, oh, I found some spare change. And then he like walks out of the pool and then Ralph comes up and someone stole my juice money. Anyways, I have one more quote. Last one. Watch me like a bug under glass if they want to.
Oh, Bart says that.
And by Bart, you mean Jeff, right?
Is it Jeff?
Yeah, it's Jeff. I was trying to give you
From Rear Window?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That sounds like such a Bart quote.
It does. Especially since he's kind of going crazy in that episode, like when he's cooped up by himself. So,
for sure. They have good writers,
Yeah, and so did Hitchcock for Rear Window.
Yeah, this is another movie based on a short story.
Yeah, short story was... It must have been Murder, right? It had to be Murder.
Yeah. Yeah, which makes how many now? Like what? I think 7
Hold on.
of our 16.
This was a short story, not a short film.
Yeah, I said short story.
Yeah, I think most of the ones we've done have been based off short films.
Yeah, and then some of The Thing was a short story.
It's a strange statement to be made on film, I think, in that a lot of the movies that we watch are successful movies that have stood the test of time and the box offices. And even outside the horror / thriller genre, a lot of the successful movies have source material, whether it's based off of a book or a short story or a short film.
A true
story in the case of like The Conjuring.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It's just interesting that a lot of successful media is actually based off of a formerly shadowed piece of media.
Truncated version of the full media.
Or a highly successful one.
Oh, you mean that like the film, the sort of mass product film overshadows the original source material.
Exactly.
Absolutely. I would say that of Bird Box.
Yeah,
that was a short story first.
For sure.
Or a novel first.
Yeah.
And I think that partially comes down to budget and anti-intellectualism. Because people don't like reading books.
I mean, I know it's not what was meant when she said the quote, but Stella says, "Nothing has caused the human race so much trouble as intelligence."
Yeah, that's exactly it. Sort of this product of truncated media that then gets expanded. I mean, there are so many pieces that get overshadowed. And I think that part of it, too, is because somebody found something in it and then it just happened to be, from a budget standpoint, feasible to blow up into this much bigger piece. And in doing so, commercializes it. Which is why so many people say, oh, the books are better. Typically, they're not as commercial. They're a little bit more artistic.
Yeah.
And I think this movie does a good job of being both artistic and commercial.
Oh, for sure. I think when people say, oh, the books are better than the movie, people say that a lot more than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's because a movie takes less imagination to participate in. They give you exactly what the main character looks like. They give you exactly how they deliver their lines or their dialogue. Mm-hmm. And you don't get to wonder too much about it. You don't get to impart your own experiences and your own opinion onto what's going on like you do in a book. It's kind of this weird dichotomy to it because you have that on one hand, but then a book offers much more detail usually.
Mm-hmm.
It takes much longer to read a book than it does to watch a movie.
Yeah.
And in this case, I said yesterday that I was going to read the short story, and of course, when you mean to do something and you have it like in a window that's behind the window that you're using to like work on stuff on your computer. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happened to me here. I was like working on work stuff, and meanwhile the short story, it had to be murder. It was just lurking behind my window on my computer. But
window,
yeah.
Double entendre or not.
There's voyeurism in my real life. I'm looking in.
Yeah, the FBI man watching you.
I'm looking in on the PDF on my computer, and the FBI man is looking right back at me.
And he's silently thinking to himself, they should do the Poltergeist.
Will they stop doing artsy Hitchcock films?
You're going to go to your Amazon page and it's just going to be all Poltergeist. And it's like, we get it. Come on. We'll do Poltergeist eventually. One of the things that we didn't talk about was Disturbia, which was the sort of half-hearted Shia LaBeouf reimagination of this movie premise. And they, instead of making him momentarily disabled by a broken leg, they give him an ankle bracelet.
He's on house arrest.
Because he's on house arrest, and it's like, well, it dilutes some of the character of Jimmy Stewart. Like, there's not a suaveness here that I particularly liked. I think that this movie, it has so much potential, but I don't think that there's a way for it to engage the modern audience in the same way that this movie does, because they have to sort of beef up the action and create sort of a fake thrill And that's why Disturbia is, in my opinion, not as successful.
I think if you look at it as a movie that has nothing to do with Rear Window, I think it's fine. It's an entertaining movie. Yeah. I think if you're going to look at it as an homage to Rear Window, it's pales in comparison.
Yeah, clearly there is a difference in quality, and they sort of try to supplement the close-knit nature of the communal space from Rear Window and place it in a suburb, and it just doesn't work the same way because the sense of sort of community suspense isn't there. It's something that is clearly inspired by Rear Window that is a good original piece of media, as far as I am aware. The Stephen King story turned movie Secret Window, Secret Garden. It has some very clear allusions to Rear Window, but it is entirely its own piece of media. And it has a vastly different plot, but it is very clearly inspired by Rear Window. And I think that is a much better and more significant homage than trying to just remake it in a modern setting.
Well, it just doesn't work in a modern setting because, like, now what do we do when we're bored at home? We, like, turn on the TV or, you know, we have a billion things we could do. Stare at our phone, whatever. You know, 1954 is like, well, I'm gonna people watch out my window, especially him being who he was. It just doesn't work nowadays because nothing holds our attention anymore, and, like, someone could literally be murdered next door and, like, a lot of people wouldn't notice.
Yeah.
Even in 1954, I think that's, like, another statement that's being made in Rear Window is that the only reason that he even notices is because he is incapacitated, because he is stuck in this cast and he can't go about and live his life as normal like all the people around him are doing.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Watch No Evil, Rear Window Edition. This is Matt.
And this is Zach.
And in the words of Alfred Hitchcock, thank you and good evening.